and questions and answers in the middle. Our general meeting is always the second Wednesday of the month. That's under the title, name this thing, under the St. Louis Unix Users Group. And that didn't work.
You're moving it too much.
Moving it too much, yes. There we go. So yeah, under the St. Louis Unix Users Group, and of course tonight we call it the St. Louis Linux Users Group. Kind of a difference in emphasis, but a lot of times you'll find very similar content between both sets of meetings. So, and you all have access to this calendar if you go out to souug.org/calendar. This is what you'll see. And if you just go out to the beginning website, you get a slightly different format of it. But so anyway, other stuff on the calendar that were just kind of interesting.
This Saturday is a good one. I'll be honest, that up there. The security conference for average IT Joes is at the Moolah Temple School, or whatever it is.
Okay.
At Fifi and 270.
Oh,
In
okay.
the corner up there, it's free. They just announced a meetup for it today.
Oh.
2 people signed up for it so far.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So at BSides, BSIDES, if you can find it on Meetup, it's a pain in the butt to find it. It took me up to 2 or 3 minutes to find it because you couldn't get it in the whole church.
Okay.
And also next week, there's another meetup. St. Louis IT professionals, they have a presentation on security and IoT.
Mm.
And I've been in contact with that speaker, and I'm trying to get him over here later on this month.
Okay. I think that is on there somewhere. What day is that?
I don't know. St. Louis IT professionals. AITP possibly.
I don't see it. Okay, you and I'll talk later and we'll make sure they get on the calendar. So,
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, we try and put things on the calendar that are just technology in general here in St. Louis. Anything that's either there's a few times we put out of town things on here, but most of them are something local in the area, it doesn't necessarily have to be Linux specific. We even put some Microsoft stuff on there if we figure it's a topic people might be interested in. Yeah. Ugh. So let's see. Just fun dates. Keep in mind. 1991, the first Linux kernel was released.
The cybersecurity is Thursday the 22nd at 5:30 p.m. at Untitled.
Okay, so the cybersecurity one is Thursday the 22nd, which would be a week from tonight, and it's at UMSL. Okay, and the security for everybody is at the Moolah on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, all day.
All day. Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, 1991. So that makes it what 25. 25 years ago is when Linux basically was born.
Hey, thank God he's not a millennial.
He's only slightly older.
Not 10 years, 9 years.
Let's see. For those of you who are interested in SUSE Linux, which is a particular distro, the Snug meeting is the SUSE Novell. That's a lunchtime meeting next Wednesday. Go click on that. And we meet at a restaurant. Lunch is provided. SUSE is probably more of a business flavored than a hobbyist flavor.
SUSE is big with IBM and some of the major players.
Yeah. Let's see. Anybody got anything else they're interested in on the calendar that you want to point out particularly?
I was AWOL yesterday.
We didn't put that on the
We
calendar.
noticed.
So how about a report?
We were done in an hour.
I went to at St. Peter's, the Maker Forge out there. They had a Linux 101 class where people are putting Linux on Raspberry Pis. And it was very rudimentary. We just bounced all over the map. It was, explaining to people PWD, working directory, LS, the list files, things like that, directory structure. mean, there were a lot of good questions that myself and a couple other guys that could spell Linux were there. And we kind of gave everybody a good idea of what was going on. I wasn't the instructor, but there was a couple of things I did point out as for beginners, and I mentioned our calendar, and I handed out some of our beginner Linux brochures, and everybody had a good time. Of course, I couldn't figure out how, I didn't go into much on how to install the Linux distros on a Raspberry Pi, but
What's the name of the hacker?
for Inventor Forge, I think it was. It was
St. Peter's?
yeah, St. Peter's. They're a nice little building, and they got all kinds of equipment in there, and a 3D printer and so forth. But there was a young man in there. He must have been about 12, and he was interested in all that. He had a Lenovo laptop, and he was asking a lot of questions. So.
Mhm.
And there were a couple of guys that I'd seen at some of the meetings here, and Hazel's group, and Slack meetings, and from all over. They're mostly interested on what they can do with Linux on a Raspberry Pi.
Okay. Neat. It sounds like you had a good group last night.
Well, I didn't want to go too far afield from reality.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, my interest is more for beginners on a desktop, laptop kind of user than Raspberry Pi, which is all essentially all command line stuff.
Right.
And there were a couple of guys that said, "Oh, that looks like DOS. I used to do DOS. And can I do all that?" I said, "Yeah." Instead of 80 commands, you got 290. Whatever.
Mm-hmm. If anyone's not familiar with Raspberry Pis, who was that last night? Phil. You have your Pi?
Yes.
Can you hold it up and?
Can you find it?
Yeah, can you find it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That looks even smaller from back here.
$5.0.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
Okay. The
99 cents at Microsoft.
99 cents. Oh my gosh.
I'll be back in an hour.
Yeah. Basically, if anybody is not familiar with those Pis, they're basically it's a computer on a chip, and there's a port that you can plug in a display and your keyboard. So there's a very small SD card slot, so you put storage on it.
SD card. You plug the
He
SD
didn't
card.
see yet.
So yeah, I mean, they're obviously not quite as powerful as a high-end laptop, but they're more powerful than the laptops were just a few years ago. And it's amazing what you can do with them. And so yeah, from a hobbyist perspective, you can buy one of those for 99 cents and bolt it on the back of some device you're making in your garage. And it runs a version of Linux, and you go out there and you can do all kinds of new things.
Typically, it's $5.
Yeah.
Places have a special.
Yeah.
It's like the first one's 99 cents and then regular price.
Buy one, get 4 free.
Yeah, it's one of those introduction things that turn you into a junkie. You gotta have more pie. So let's see. Two last things by way of announcement. We try and put the meetings that we, as an organization, ourselves run, and two of those are Slack, St. Louis Area Computer Club. That's actually part of our organization, and another one is Hazelwood. Here we go. The Hazelwood Lug.
That's where I live.
Yeah,
Fancy that.
and the two little twists here. The meeting tonight and also the Wednesday night general meeting tend to be more of, okay, we've got a somewhat organized presentation. They say somewhat. But we have somebody who spent some time.
You're
to
giving
put
me a lot.
together-
You're giving me a lot of credit.
Yeah, somebody who spent some time to put together a particular topic and a presentation. Unlike the Hazelwood meeting, which is run by Stan here, the Hazelwood meeting basically is also got the nickname of the newbies group. Whether that's a good nickname, I don't know.
We have people who've been newbies for 5 and 6 years in there.
Yeah. But
There could be people who've been newbies for 20 years.
Yeah.
You've met some of the people at
the
the Gray
standing
Bar.
order at this Hazelwood meeting is basically whoever comes in with the most simple question, the most fundamental
The newest
question.
guy in the room gets asked all the
Yeah,
questions.
basically the newest guy in the room gets to ask the question, and basically they keep working on finding good answers for your question until, okay, we got everything done? Okay, next question. Yeah, then they move on to a different topic.
The location changed because of the library closures and so forth. This one's at the Thornhill Library this month.
Okay, so this is a bad location on here. Okay,
No,
Yeah.
it
you gotta
says,
change it.
you said Thornhill. It says Thornhill.
Willowwick is the Thornhill location.
Yes.
That's,
And didn't you just tell us that that's where it is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is correct.
so it's
the way
been
it is.
updated already.
What
Yeah.
it says.
Okay, you already put the change in. Okay.
Hazelwood group at Thornhill. Okay.
Yeah. Go figure.
The other one I mentioned, Slack, St. Louis Area Computer Club, this one. This one is it really started out more as a hardware thing, but we also use it as a software install thing. So this one is like, okay, I got this computer and I'm trying to install Linux on it and I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing, or this doesn't quite seem to work right, or I've already got Linux on it, but I can't quite figure out how to. So, most of the stuff that goes on in Slack is you bring something in under your arm and everybody kind of helps you play with it and get something fixed up. So,
And sometimes there's 5 and 6 things going on in the room and I have no idea what's going on.
yeah, it's not everybody working on it at one time. It's like, yeah, you may go off in the corner with 2 or 3 guys and work on something, and somebody else is in the other corner.
Is that fun?
Unless somebody else has any other announcements, general questions. Oh,
Yeah, technology.
uh-huh.
Technology is great. It changes all the time. I have a heart problem. I've had a heart problem since Linux came out, actually, about 91. And
You don't have any time.
one of the things that they do is they hook you up and monitor you for a while and figure out what's wrong. And I had my heart checkup today. And when I went in there, I said, I need that holder thing, that I carry around, which I hate. And we got a new thing now. So I want to show you this. And what it is, it's one pack. It has 4 sensors in here that goes across the heart, and it reads the various electrical signals.
So you don't have to carry the recorder on your hip.
You don't carry the recorder, but it's Bluetooth connected to a special phone, a Samsung. I'm afraid it might blow up.
Keep it close to your heart.
This one here has a special app on it, and it doesn't work as a phone. There's a big warning on it, do not call 911 on it. And it just tells me that it's monitoring, it's updated just now from it, tells me what the battery charge is on the one that I got. And this will work up to 30 feet away, he said, but don't go farther than 10. So it's just a
Or it blows
Bluetooth.
up.
Bluetooth. Then it hits the phone, and the phone app calls the manufacturer of it, and they want me to wear this for 30 days, and then they'll graph that and look for any anomalies over the 30-day period. This phone lasts about 12 hours, and so when I get home, I'll put it in the charger. Doesn't really make any difference. I'll wear it all night. They gave me about 6 of these little patches to put on, and the monitor itself, they gave me 2 because there's a battery in that because it's cross-connected. And then they made me sign the thing saying that if I lose it, it's $2,500. And I said, maybe I should just take that old box with me, I just thought it was an interesting technical thing. The guy said I'm the first one in his office this way. out at St. Luke's. And the first one he put out, so I was the guinea pig for all these office
Pass me my
girls that were
mouse.
talking about it. So, anyway, I just thought
Might
it
come
was
in handy.
interesting. I thought, I thought the Bluetooth, the
I don't hear any
connection to
sound
the phone,
on
and
Conference
the update to a
Should have at least this.
database located somewhere else.
At least I don't
It's a
think.
fantastic thing. I don't expect it to
This
be
shows
bad for
on
me
dial,
at
but
all.
this
I
is
don't expect them to
connected.
find anything.
Bill's still out there.
Medicare pays almost all of it.
But, what we'll do is,
No.
Don, at some point,
But I
just
can-
turn your Bluetooth on and push a function key. We'll see if all of a sudden.
Yeah, I can hear it
reads,
on
it
this
doesn't-
that's dialed.
it doesn't-
Turn off the other feed.
Well, or turn, you have to turn that up.
Oh, is there a?
All right, let's see.
You never emailed, you never
It doesn't
emailed.
sound great, but we'll see.
What, are you using Hotmail or something?
Anybody who has a question on anything, you can ask now. Doesn't have to be on tonight's topic. Of course, if it's not something about computers, you may not get a very good answer here, but you can ask anything. We just may not have the answer. So, anybody got any questions they want to throw out? Lee.
Where do I turn this on?
Has anybody
On
been
your
successful
device.
in setting up, running SketchUp under Wine?
I did about 4 years ago.
Okay, well, for some reason, Wine installs, it seems to install, drops an icon on the desktop for you, click the icon, nothing. Look at bar log messages, there's a list that long of all kinds of crud that doesn't appear to be working. And I have no clue how to troubleshoot it.
Is that a note taking or? I'm sorry, is it the labor process done?
Say again?
SketchUp. You want to see what
SketchUp.
SketchUp is?
Can you hear me now?
What, I don't know what SketchUp does.
So you might
Oh,
want to mute that, unless you actually, you might want to mute that, because that would get recorded.
You know, I think they hired Trimble to do it based on one of their programs, but they're giving it out for Windows and Mac, basic version. And I've seen notes all over the place that it's supposed to run fine under Wine, but it doesn't.
It's kind of like an architect kind of thing, houses and.
Yeah, I want to use it to make drawings
It's-
for, you know, my 3D printer. Because I can't wrap my mind around FreeCAD. I've tried it 3 or 4 times and I keep getting lost because what's in the tutorial isn't what's in the program.
Uh-huh.
So I decided to try SketchUp, but it doesn't work.
Last meeting I remember was 3 or 4 months ago, but there is a local Trimble office. It's
Well, they're not going to help you with free software.
in hey, it never hurts to ask. Yeah, I mean, seriously. I mean, you know, I heard the
Maybe they have a user.
Does it
it's
sound
not so
okay?
much their own user group, but they're connected with, I'm trying to think of the name of it, but their meeting's coming up next month, I think, or later this month. Not GPS, Geo.
Well, that's
GIS.
GPS stuff. That's nothing to do with the CAD program.
Right, but the Trimble people are very involved with that user group. That's how I wound up.
And what's the user group?
GIS. So, yeah, if you look through the calendar and look for the GIS user group, there's, we either just passed the meeting or it's coming up next. Where's it?
Well, Gary, don't worry about it. I'd rather find
Okay.
somebody that can help me troubleshoot Wine.
Okay. Well, I mean, somebody there at Trimble who's already done it, they, you know, say, oh yeah, I've run it on Linux. And
I give you 10 to 1 odds. Nobody there can spell Linux.
all we can do is try. So,
Okay. Thanks for the suggestion.
all right. Okay. Let's see. Any other general questions? Ooh, I got one.
Gary, you got a question?
Gary,
Gary,
what's your
what's your
question?
Let's see. A friend of mine did had her music on an iPhone and an iPod, and so first she plugs in. She wound up corrupting playlists on her Macintosh, and so she plugs in the iTunes and.
Oh, you missed the best part. The Apple Store or up to their playlist on the Macintosh?
You're right, that's right. But anyway, so she winds up erasing the playlists on both the iPhone and the iPod. Anybody know if there's anything magic that you can pull a set of playlists that used to be on an iPod or used to be on an iPhone, which are supposedly now not there?
With test disk, do it. It's designed to recover
Photo rec?
photo rec. You know, this is photo rec is a subset of test disk,
Mhm.
which is a Linux program. I believe there's also, I think it's also multi-platform, and I've used it to recover. Had one of the new guys wanted to dual boot his brother's laptop and happened to completely overlay his Windows 7 system. And he had just been to India and taken 3,000 pictures of the family, and they were, you know, so we formatted it as a Linux job, but the files are still all down there. It's just the directory structure is gone, and that's what test disk does.
Okay.
So if you can get that hard drive and hook it up to a Linux box, you might be able to run that and
Was the hard drive down on the desktop? Or just go to the-
Haven't tried it.
Because, I mean, at one point, you would plug the iPod into the USB port, and it would become a hard drive on the desktop. So the question is that feature still present on this model?
Yeah, that's a good question.
There's newer models that don't do that.
Okay, good points. Okay, other questions? Hearing none. Okay, our speaker tonight is Chuck Doolittle from Graybar Electric. And Chuck did a presentation last night on kind of an introduction to virtual private networks and started getting into open VPNs. And that's where we're going to pick it up tonight. He's going to tell us more about open VPNs and give us a demo of how this one is put together and works.
Did you go to sleep halfway through? Because I made it all the way through last night.
We require repetition.
Well, the thing is
Where's Steve?
I convinced him to do a live demo tonight. We're gonna set up a VPN from Bud.
but the thing is tonight you're advertising for tonight is you're going to talk about open.
I'm going to talk about the whole thing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to try something tonight. Besides giving a talk, I'm going to be recording the talk, which I should be doing now. That's why I'm wearing this goofy headset. And I've got my phone here set up and dialed into the conference call that I'm recording. So if we get into any large discussions, we can pass this around and record those conversations. So, okay, okay. So I'm Chuck Doolittle. Most of you met me last night at worst. I'm an amateur radio operator, and besides being a systems engineer at Graybar Electric, I am the CIO, chief cook, and bottle washer of a little operation we call Heritage Information Radio, a small online and local AM station based in Norwich, Connecticut, serving what we call the last green valley out there. We do 24-hour programming, music, and public interest, weather, local announcements, that kind of thing. AM1700.org. Okay, that pitch out of the way. So virtual private networks. I think some people probably are familiar already, but we'll get started from the basics. A virtual private network. It's a virtual, so no hardware is involved. It's all software constructs. Private. It can't be intercepted between the endpoints. Of course, if you're on either side of an endpoint, then sure, the traffic is visible, but generally speaking, if you set it up right over the internet, nobody's going to see anything, even if they're watching. Of course, cannot comes with a star after it, but anybody that has to worry about that star and somebody that could crack that encryption probably shouldn't be doing whatever it is they're doing in the first place. And it's a network. So normal TCP/IP addressing, routing apply If you set it up with Ethernet devices, then any protocol that would work over an Ethernet device will work over this. It really isn't restricted to just TCP/IP, but yeah, that's what pretty much everybody uses nowadays. So why use a VPN? There's privacy. A lot of people are worried about making sure people can't snoop on them, especially if you have multiple locations. Geolocation, we'll give an example of that later, but basically you can appear to be anywhere that you can connect an endpoint to, so you can get around geolocation blocks and such things. Connecting multiple devices, there's lots of services out there. GoToMeeting, Find My PC, those kind of things that are easy if you just want to be somewhere and connect to one machine. But if you've got multiple devices, if you actually want to connect networks, then the VPN is a great use. And if you're setting the same thing up over and over again, or you want it to be permanent, a virtual private network's a lot better than SSH tunnels and such other methods. So geolocation, you can appear to originate from a different location. So if I have a VPN server in London and a VPN server in New York, the user can connect to one of those, and then as far as anybody else on the internet is concerned, they can they would appear to come to the internet from either London or New York, and thereby usually managing to bypass any geo restriction links or geolocation restrictions. Much like the BBC, lots of technical people like the BBC. The BBC provides all their services to people that appear to be in London for free. You can watch almost any of their television shows. They have huge archives. But you have to be in the UK. Well, this is a way you can be in the UK. And we can debate whether or not it's any kind of incorrect way to do it, but if you own the VPN server out there, I can't really see how somebody could argue with it. It is your device in a different country. It's there, so why not? Okay, so when maybe, and I put maybe there because everything is always questionable. If you have a one-time connection to a server, probably not going to be worth the time it takes to set up a VPN. If you only need access to a single IP or port, there's generally other ways to do it. If you're talking about PCs, there's Find My PC, Log Me In, Splashtop, all sorts of things. Or if you're unable to change firewall settings. I don't know if they let us out here on the guest network, but lots of places restrict things. If you don't have the authority to change the firewall settings, maybe you'll have to do something else. Generally speaking, SSH tunneling is a little more convoluted, but it's usually quicker to set up unless you have firewall problems or something. So if you just need a one-off, use an SSH tunnel. Don't waste your time setting up a VPN. VPN types. So basically, we can roll our own, which is what I'm going to demonstrate later, and then we'll try live, see how far we get. It's infinitely configurable for certain values of infinite, yeah, but it does generally take a little longer to set up. Or there's commercial services available. You can pick your exit point. You can say, I want to appear to come from London or Brazil or Europe, wherever. Quicker setup, but generally all that does is get the machine you're connecting from onto the internet from a different location. There's no way to use a lot of those services to connect networks in, say, if you have two houses, or from your house to your office, or anything like that. Or consider the cost. There's no reason any solution you can come up with, unless you're running a real business moving real amounts of traffic. There's no solution I've been able to come up with that's not way overkill that costs more than $20 a month. The commercial service is included. I can do a one VPN hub for $5 a month with DigitalOcean. If you want redundancy, you can get another setup in another data set, one of their other data centers, for another $5 a month. $10 a month, you can have redundancy in case half of the DigitalOcean cloud goes down.
Would you be getting that through two different providers or through the same provider?
Depends how paranoid you are.
Okay, if you're paranoid, can you get two for $5 a month each?
If you well,
What other-
DigitalOcean is the cheapest one.
Okay, so, but
If you're really paranoid, I have one in DigitalOcean through Graybar. I have some Azure.
so you're
Credit.
sufficiently paranoid.
No, it's free. It's free to me. So, so I have one that's free to me, and I have one that I pay for, and I only pay for one that's $5 a month.
Okay. But if I wanted to get a second one out through DigitalOcean,
It would be $5 a month, and just if you put it in a different.
DigitalOcean.
Well, then
It'd be some other price.
it would be some other provider. The cheapest Azure ones you can get are about $12 a month. Even their smallest one would be just fine.
Linode's, I think, $10.
10 or 20, yeah. It used to be 20.
All you have to do is search.
Yeah.
ExpressVPN offers them for free.
Well, that's the commercial offering. If we're talking about rolling your own,
Yeah.
Basically you would want to look for VPS servers. That's virtual private server. If you can find a cheap VPS that gives you decent bandwidth and transfer allowance, then yeah, really, if you can run Linux, you can even run it with Windows, and you can even mix and match if you wanted. But if you can run Linux on it, it'll do this. I'll show some examples later of how you can have multiple ones and such things. So before we get into the OpenVPN specific portion of the evening, some generic VPN planning. If you're going to roll your own route, these are things you're going to need to consider. We'll touch on all of that. I've got a separate slide for each one of these, so I'll just skip ahead. Site to site, or user access, or both. Should be pretty self-explanatory. Do you just have two houses or a house in your office that you want to connect, or you're going to have users where, if you're supporting a business, you've got 10 people that might be out on the road that want to dial in, or a little bit of both? How many? How important is this to them? That will probably make you decide whether or not you want more than one hub server or where it should be. How often will if you're doing user access, how often will the users change? What kind of devices will they be coming from? I like OpenVPN. We're going to be talking about OpenVPN. There's OpenSwan that does IPsec. There's some other things you can do. Just about all of them have a client for just about anything nowadays. Ports and firewalls. Some trial and error may be needed. Again, that depends on how much you can adjust those firewalls. You may have to find ways to get out that you can use non-standard ports. It may drive the need for TCP or UDP. UDP is generally faster, especially on lossy networks, like mobile networks. If you're dialing in from your phone, I say dialing, but everybody gets my point. Because if you have a TCP connection inside a TCP connection, when it degrades twice as quick because there's two timeout timers involved in the TCP connection. And that's why UDP is okay, because the underlying TCP connection that's encapsulated will still handle lost packets and error correction and all that. Comcast, gotta love them. They throttle most standard VPN ports, specifically OpenVPN and OpenSwan, to less than dial-up speed. When I say less than dial-up speed, I mean 10 kilobits a second. I've measured it. So the beauty of it is they think they're smart, but they're really not. Use an alternate port. I use 9201, 9202. We'll talk about the need for multiple ports later. But anywhere from 9201 to 9210 work fine for me, and no problem. You get line speed both directions. Charter, near as far as I know, does not throttle anybody. I don't know how many people are from the other side of the river. Passwords and certificates. Site-to-site connections, you should use certificates. It's set it and forget it. On users, really is your choice. If you have a few users with low turnover, certificates are probably better because users generally reuse their same passwords. And if they get compromised, it limits the chance that they're going to could get privileged access to your network. If you have a lot of users with high turnover, you're supporting a big business, something like that, or there's already a password management system in place for the users, you can use passwords. It's probably going to be okay. The basic concern is you need to balance the security that you're going to get with the support man hours it's going to take. Subnets. It's a virtual private network, so you've got to have a plan for subnets. Have a plan before you start. Spend time to write down everything that everybody will ever want to talk to inside this network and everywhere they could possibly come from inside this network. Figure out what IPs you can't change, and then somebody was saying the 10 network is big yesterday. Yeah, the 10 network is huge. There's probably going to be plenty of places you can find to stuff a few other subnets that you can use. Like the plague, avoid the 192.168.0 and .1 Class C subnets. They're used by far too many people as the default subnet. And if you don't change away from that, then at some point you're going to get somebody on the network, even if it's just to test subnet, and then you have an IP, then you have a subnet conflict, and you've got a lot more headaches. You generally can get around it with NAT and that kind of stuff, but if you plan well to begin with, you can save yourself a lot of headaches. And always leave room for expansion. There's no reason to pack 5 subnets in 5 consecutive Class C networks if you're using the 10 network. There's plenty of room. Make everybody a Class B. You'll never need it, but you'll never run out either. Like line numbers in BASIC. Everybody, you always went by 5. At least I did. Routing. If you're setting this up, and you're not generally, if you're not talking about user access, if you're talking about site-to-site access, if you're talking about user access, that'll get handled. I'll show where later, but especially for site-to-site, if you've got just a few sites or you only have one VPN hub, then static routing may serve you just fine. If you're using multiple hubs, you need dynamic routing, because if you lose a link, you've got to be able to, the network has to be able to rebuild itself without your intervention, or you may as well not have redundancy. On Linux, I use the Quagga routing daemon, and I use OSPF as the routing protocol. Typically on Linux, you need to disable the reverse path filtering, which causes the kernel to drop packets if they arrive on an interface that does not have the IP for the destination. We'll see where that comes into play when we get to service IPs later. So, not much later. And now for something not different. Service IPs. So, there was a great deal of confusion yesterday about service IPs. A service IP is an address that you assign a service, a web service, a database service, anything else. But you assign it to a service, not to the server. The reason for this, outside of networks, is you can have multiple machines. We call it high availability. And if one of the machines goes down, you can just move that IP to the other server, and we get right back to business instead of having to worry about the server that's down and bringing it all back up. In terms of the networks, you need it because we have to be able to follow the open path through the network to get somewhere. And if you're using an interface-specific IP address, then you won't get there because there's no route to that address anymore. It's absolutely needed in a multiple VPN hub setup. You should set outside a separate subnet. That subnet is I usually make that my biggest subnet on my little network. That's a class 23-bit, so it's 2 class Cs next to each other. Dynamic routing is needed if you're using service IPs, and you should put the service IP on the loopback adapter. We'll see why later. Yes, Lincoln.
As an example, typically if I'm setting up Apache, I'll bind it to 127.0.0.1. You're saying add the IP that you want to be serving to the local loopback interface, and then use that physical IP when you set up Apache.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you would use that IP. Yeah, that's your service IP. It's your web service IP. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So the main point here is you're binding it to an IP most of the time anyway, but you're saying assign that, put that on a loopback interface, not a physical interface. Therefore, the kernel's always going to see that IP, and then he'll route it out whichever interface is up for shortest route.
Exactly, because if it's on an interface that is down, it will never answer for it. Right. And the beauty there is if you have that, then you decide to build another web server, you can just move that IP over to the other web server. Right. And now that web server is serving your traffic.
Yeah, the main point is you want a separate IP for that service as opposed to whatever the machine's answering to.
Exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, and in the case of doing it with the networks, you really need it on a separate subnet.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I'm just getting that clear in my mind. I just want to make sure we're all on track.
So, failover with service IP. So this is my best attempt because I don't do enough PowerPoint to make things animated. This is my best attempt. So if I'm a user and I'm connected to VPN A and VPN B, and my routing protocol has set VPN A as my preferred path, and I'm talking to the server on the service subnet IP, then I talk kind of inside the VPN here over this left to right or left-sided connection. Now, if I was pointing at the subnet A's IP, that would work just fine. The problem is if either this connection here at the top or this connection here at the bottom fails for some reason, the network no longer has a path to the server on subnet A's IP. Well, that's a problem. But if I have my user connected to the service IP, then my routing daemon will then automatically reconfigure the network for me via open shortest path first to route through the VPN B server and then down here to my server. And aside from waiting a few seconds for maybe a minute for the timeouts to occur, for the routing daemon to catch up with itself, typically TCP connections see a little bit of latency, but don't actually drop.
Not dropping is good.
Usually. So, before we go on any further, are there any other questions on service IPs?
If you had 2 web servers on the subnet, would you have a separate IP address for those service IP address?
You could, or you could have a third service IP that you used to load balance between the two. If they were serving the same content,
No,
yeah, if they're serving different purposes, then each purpose is a separate service. So have a separate service IP, yes. And the beauty of having an entire subnet for this is you can break it down a lot. You can have a lot of service IPs. Even if the machines, And that's actually a really good point. Even if you have one machine that's your web server and your database server and your default route to the network and I don't know, something else, you can have as many of those service IPs on the loopback adapter as you want. So someday you say, this machine's getting too busy. Well, I'm going to move my database off this machine to another machine I build. The clients don't have to do anything. You build the database, you move the data over, you move the IP over. The clients still go to the same place.
Assuming you do it at midnight.
I didn't say anything about an outage. But yeah, that's really the beauty of a service IP is whoever's got that alias will take care of it. You can do all sorts of fun stuff with that. So network address translation is also required. It's necessary when you're doing dynamic routing because if we go back to this page, the packets that leave this interface aren't really leaving this interface. It's a virtual interface. So the kernel helpfully replaces the IP with the source IP is the IP on the subnet you are leaving. So by default, if I connect over here, when it replies, it will appear to have come from the subnet A's IP. That's great as long as it's up, but when it fails, you're not getting there anymore. So what you do is source NAT the outbound traffic to the service IP of the endpoint. So that you set it up so that, and I'll show an example of this later when we get into the demo, but even though it's leaving on this route, it still has an address here. So the network still has a route from your user to that location at the top of the cloud, even if it has to go through VPN-B instead. One of the other uses is to source NAT all the outbound traffic from a specific site to hide the internal subnet. If I've got a bunch of users behind one of the VPN endpoints, I've got a server at the other end, I don't really necessarily need to allow everybody to connect to those internal machines. I can source NAT, the outbound traffic, so that nobody can get back to those machines. It keeps them safer if you're worried about that kind of thing. Personally, when I'm doing this on my own personal use, I leave everything as wide open as possible. It's me and about 4 or 5 other guys, and we're not really worried about each other. If we're worried about each other, we've got bigger problems. Okay, so that brings us to the OpenVPN portion of the evening. Are there any other questions on generic VPNs before we move on to the OpenVPN specific stuff?
How do you spell VPN?
Virtual private network.
Hopefully I'll get more when we get into the demo. We look at some configuration.
Sure you will. We missed you last night, Sam. We're growing too quick. So, what do we got? We're about half an hour? Okay. So, hey, look, it's me again. So, OpenVPN. OpenVPN is one of many chunks of software that does basically the same thing in slightly different ways. I like OpenVPN because, well, it's...
Where does this come from? The OpenVPN, is that a source word thing?
It's on pretty much all the regular distros nowadays. I think there is a nightly build out on SourceForge or GitHub, but
I
think it's on GitHub.
I think GitHub is the main source.
Yeah, but typically it doesn't change enough that you can do a package manager install and I'll actually show that when we get there. It's both a client and a server. It's the same binary that performs differently based on the configuration files you feed it. A separate instance of the VPN client or the VPN service is spawned for each configuration file that's in the configuration directory. This goes back to where I said we can have multiple ports. You have, and I'll show examples why you would want to have multiple ports. One of the things that annoys me is that Linux uses an extension on the configuration files of .conf, but Windows uses .ovpn. Linux are helpfully in Etsy OpenVPN, probably exactly where anybody roughly familiar with Linux would expect to find them. And in Windows, they're in your appropriate program files, whether you're 32 or 64-bit, config. And if you're using Windows, well, I use it as a client, you want to set up the OpenVPN service when you're installing it, whether you plan to start it automatically or manually. The GUI that comes with the OpenVPN Windows client, frankly, sucks. You don't want to go through the trouble. It's much easier to hit the Windows key, type services, hit enter, scroll down the list till you find OpenVPN, and click on it if you need it. Or for those Windows savvy enough, I don't even do it. You could make a batch file that would do the same thing. It's just it's a standard Windows service that you could call. You can put other stuff in that in those configuration directories. It will only attempt to parse either the .conf or .ovpn files. I highly suggest you store the certificates in the same directory because you can save path length in the config files. By default, if you don't specify a path, it looks in the same place as where the config file it found is located. So it makes everything much easier to read. Now we take a minute to talk about network topology, tunnels, and taps. So the basics here are that, I should swap that on. The tunnel is what it says. It's an old point-to-point connection. It simulates a dial-up connection. It's good if you have a few connections, but being a point-to-point connection, it uses a /30 subnet for each connection. And if you're doing more than a few connections, your route table can begin to sprawl very quickly because you'll have a route for each individual subnet that you have connected, plus if you're using site-to-site, you will have a route for the networks on the far side. So you'll have 2 to 4 extra route table entries for every connection on your server. Tap, can only assume it refers to the old vampire taps. It's a point-to-point or point-to-multi-point connection. It simulates a Ethernet. It is an Ethernet driver in Windows specifically. So it's better for lots of connections if you're connecting to more than just one site to another or something like that, because all connections share the subnet. And it's harder, though, because of that, to control your routing protocol's routing preferences in finer detail. When you start making more of them, if you have a bunch of machines and you start making them into more of a mesh, you might want to look at going back to tunnels, because it gives you finer grained control over the routing preferences between machines. I strongly recommend, I'm only going to show one method of configuring tonight, but I strongly recommend that if you're doing this, configure both methods use consecutive port numbers. There's one line in the config file that will specify whether it spawns with a tunnel device or a tap device. Set up the server so it uses both. Apple devices, they have a built-in OpenVPN client, but they only use tunnel devices. I've yet to find anybody that only use taps, but the OpenVPN client that you can download for free from the Google Play Store only supports tunnel devices. If you pay $10 once, so it's an app, it does support tap devices and it supports multiple connections and stuff. Certificate management servers. EasyRSA is the simplest solution, if you can find it, for small installs. It's a basic CA server. It has some very basic scripts that you can use. We'll see an example of that here in a while. If you already have an existing certificate server, you can use it. You just need to create some certificate sign-in requests. And if you have an existing server, you already know how to do that stuff. You'll need a certificate pair, a public and a private key for each endpoint. You can allow the sharing of certificates. Don't do it. It's a security nightmare because you can then never revoke the certificate unless you replace everybody else's certificate too. If you're using certificates, just take the time and run the script 4 or 5 times. It's not. You will see it's not a big script. If you're using multiple VPN hubs, use the same root CA cert for both of them. Literally just copy the etc OpenVPN directory between servers and make a few tweaks to the config files. But that way, the clients only have to worry about one config file, and they only have one device, and there's a multiple remote option, which I'll show when we get to the client config, that would break if you're not using the same CA certs.
I think it's maybe the first time you've used the word hub. So what's a hub?
It's not, but okay. The hub is the VPN server. So if you have multiple VPN servers, I don't like using the word server because a server, everything is a server. If you're connecting other servers, so if you're using, I wonder how far back I have to go through the.
You can vouch for you.
Right. Right here. So VPN A is a hub and VPN B is a hub. When we get way down to the bottom of the slide deck, it will look much more like a hub on the slide I created for Lee after the talk yesterday.
Back up. The server's the hub there, isn't it?
No, the VPN A and B are.
But those are just virtual links.
But that's where everybody connects to. The hub is the VPN server. The hub is where everybody connects to.
Okay, but it's not the VPN server, it's the VPN network you're connecting into, in which case hub is a better analogy, right?
But it's still a server. It's still the virtual server you have out in the cloud or at your office or house or whatever, or on Bud later.
Okay, so you're differentiating between the configuration device for that VPN on the physical server versus the name of the link that the VPN creates.
Yes.
Okay.
Because that server actually the traffic goes through that server.
Right. So
it's a hub.
So right. So technically, VPN A and B are the names of the links. If you drew a cloud where that dotted line physically connects to the server, representing the VPN configuration on that server, that would be more technically accurate for a hub, correct?
Okay, hold on.
We have a nice whiteboard right up here.
No, how do I get it?
Back up. Go back to the picture.
No, I'm going to a different slide that will hopefully. I've got to go all the way through the slide deck. Unfortunately, it's I think the last slide, or very close to it. Does that actually work? Oh, there we. Oh, there we go. Okay, here we are. So VPN A and VPN B are hubs. Both Site A and Site B connect to them. And if I had users out on the internet, the users would be connecting to Site or to VPN A or VPN B or both.
So what are they?
Those are the. Thank you. They are the virtual private servers, typically that we use out in the cloud. That is what you're going to do when we set up Bud later. Is you're going to collapse the server and the VPN A function onto the same OS.
Okay. Well, that
it provides a separate. This server out in the cloud provides a VPN service.
So those are your two machines in New York and London, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, no, not in the example, but if I had, I personally have one in Azure and I have one in DigitalOcean.
Okay.
And that's actually this diagram right here. So we can get back into the. But got to slide back 20 or 30 slides. Give me a second.
So there is a router at
I'll take that. That works too.
at Azure,
Yes.
which is doing the routing for a virtual private network A.
Yes. Yeah.
And then there is a different router, a different hub, doing it over DigitalOcean or virtual private network B.
Exactly. And all of my sites connect to both of them at the same time, hopefully. Which is why I bring up, this is why we need the need for dynamic routing in OSPF, because I've got to set a preference and route the traffic or be able to switch between them.
Question. When you say dynamic routing, you mean name conversion to IP?
No, I mean routing, like network routing, not name resolution.
Yeah, the thing of a router with two outbound links, multi-home.
Okay.
You have to pick which link to use. That's what the routing gives you with OSPF.
It's open.
Open shortest path first.
Quagga and routing, maybe a talk for another day. VPN 201. But
102.
102.
I don't know.
This 101.
This is 101 and 102 apparently.
103 then.
Or I don't know. It's slightly more advanced. Was my point.
Okay, it could be 201.
Let's ask the guy that works at the college.
Yeah.
That'd be 103 or 201.
Yes.
Yes.
One or the other.
Yeah.
Pick one.
Yeah. So
I like the numbers that are on the table.
yeah, one of them is good. Your choice. Okay.
So your last point on your using multiple hubs,
Yes.
you're talking about using multiple hubs on the same VPN?
No, each hub is a VPN.
Well, depends how you define network. What is the internet but a network of networks? So I consider anything I can route to inside my network as part of a single VPN. I have two routers or hubs that serve traffic that I can connect to, one in each, two different data centers, but it's still one network. I can get from anywhere to anywhere, no matter which one of those I go through. That's what the dynamic routing is.
Yeah, but still a hub is a single VPN serve point, which would be that VPN server somewhere in the cloud.
Yes, it is a VPN endpoint. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Connection point.
Yes.
So there would be times when a single VPN may have multiple hubs in it.
Yes, and mine does. And that picture that we went down to, and I'm not going down to again until we're there
Yeah,
again.
but once you
But
get
yes,
there,
that
then,
VPN has two hubs in it. Yes.
once you get there, you need to be able to route the traffic properly, which is where some sort of routing rules come into play.
Well, what's that? The picture you showed before had two different VPNs.
Okay, it's VPN server A and VPN server B. How's that?
Oh,
It provides a VPN service, and it is server A or 1 or 2 or whatever. They're not separate VPNs. It's just two machines providing that service.
And is your data center local, or is your data center in either DigitalOcean or Azure?
Azure's is in Chicago, and DigitalOcean's
I mean,
is
the
New York.
servers that are on your network.
Yes.
Are those at Grable, or are they?
No,
also
this is all my personal stuff. So I've got a network at home in Hannibal. Steve Stegman's on my network. He lives out in Wright City. I've got a guy that I work with at Gray Bar that has a connection from St. Charles. There's another guy that's on the network from Springfield, Illinois, and then the guy I work with the radio station with is all the way out in Connecticut. And all of those machines talk to the DigitalOcean and Azure servers. Now, I was going to make a point later about you could actually create shortcut routing and such things, but I've never had a need to. I don't move enough traffic. So maybe that'll be more obvious when we get that slide
The
again.
network of services that are at the bottom of that slide, that you don't have to go finding it. Those, you said the VPS at DigitalOcean and the VPS at Azure both will point
Yes.
to those services. So the servers that have those services, are those in Azure or DigitalOcean?
I have a few other virtual private servers in DigitalOcean that do provide services for my network, but most of the other ones are located at the people's houses.
Yeah, I guess in my head, what I was trying to think about was how many different encrypted paths are there? It seems like it's a VPS.
There are quite a few. It becomes a mesh.
And then latency. Do you see latency as a result of all the?
Let's go through. I will be happy to log into my network and demonstrate some routing and such things. I do
That pounding up in that ceiling. That's
Well, you should
normal.
mention that.
That's normal.
nothing to be afraid of.
It seems to have to open the
Damper.
washing machine and move part of it. To
Yeah.
the top.
It seems to have gotten worse since last winter, William.
Okay, so
You should feed him more often.
So let's get through the configuration stuff. We can talk more about, I was hoping to leave time at the end for specific use cases. And I think that's what we're getting into here, is where things are in the world and such things. So common configuration options. Ignore it. Common configuration options. I realize this does look pretty small, but we're going to have a separate slide where we show the configuration options on all as we build the configuration files, and all of these will come up again. There's port, that's a port number, protocol being TCP or UDP, whether you want a tap device or a tunnel device, or if you expect to have multiple connections out of the same machine, you want to give a specific tap or tunnel number to the configuration file so that later when you're setting up your routing, you know which one to give preference to. The CA, CERT, and key options are hopefully pretty self-explanatory as far as SSL certs go. The server option, unfortunately, is a bad name. That's actually the subnet that the server will hand out to its clients. We'll see where that comes into play later. The ifconfig pool persist parameter specifies a file that it's essentially like a DHCP log where it keeps track of the client and the IP it gave it, so that if the same client connects again, it tries to give it the same IP time and time again. That one line there, the push route line, that's what I was talking about earlier, where you don't necessarily have to set up dynamic routing for your clients. This is a way for the server to advertise a route and have the client configure a route to typically your service IP subnet. The client to client option. By default, OpenVPN does not allow clients to talk to each other on the same VPN. This is useful in the case of having a bunch of clients that you want to connect to a server and access just a service on that server, but you don't want them to talk to each other. If you're doing any site-to-site stuff, or you're just, like I'm doing, it's just a bunch of friends, enable that option. It will save you a lot of trouble with the routing and such things later. Comp LZO, that's compression. Somebody made a joke about, of course it must match, but it must match between the clients and the server. There is an adaptive option. Do not use it. It does not work. Adaptive is supposed to say, if the other end if the other end prefers it, then use it, but they try to both negotiate it and they get nowhere. If you're doing lots of encrypted HTTPS traffic or SSH tunnels across there, probably not going to do you much good to turn compression on. If what you're doing is remote data capture from a serial device or regular HTTP web traffic, it's going to save you some bandwidth going through the VPN servers.
So there's a none option.
Pardon?
There's a none option.
If you just don't put it in the file. There's no flag to it. It's just comp LZO, or you just don't put it in. Keep alive does what it sounds like, except that it does. The syntax is a little strange. I'll hit on that when it shows up later. And user and group. If you have a Linux machine that you're using, you have to start OpenVPN as root because it has to have permissions to create the network devices. Once it goes through that, it will drop down to the user or group option so that you specify. It will set UID and set GID to those options so that if something happens down the road, it's less likely to cause you lots of trouble. Lee.
I see you using # on multiple tabs. What's the comment symbol in those comp files?
Right. Well, that's a number. Specify a number if you're using multiple
so hash
instances.
is still a comment?
Hash or semicolon, if I remember right. If you look at the sample config files that come when you install the package, it'll be pretty obvious. I'll say that. We're going to look at some config files that I have greatly abbreviated, and just so they fit on the screen. But if you go look at the config files that come by default to see what the other options are. Like I said, these are the common ones. This is what you need to absolutely worry about to set it up. There's lots of other things that you don't need to worry about. Okay, so I'm going to walk through the commands. It's not a live demonstration. We'll do that later, but it's a demonstration nonetheless. I have a server. This is a one-to-one VPN. I've made this as simple as we can. The server and a client, and they connect through the internet. The subnet that everybody has, the VPN subnet, is going to be 10. It's right there at the top of the screen, 10.210.0, and it's a /24. The server will always be the first IP in that subnet. It assigns itself that at startup. So it'll be 10.210.1. The client, I already know this answer, will get 10.210.2. That, however, is not guaranteed. And it is certainly not guaranteed. It's essentially random if you don't use that IP persist file I showed earlier. Generally speaking, if you have a large enough subnet that every client that could possibly connect can have its own IP, and you use that file, the IPs will almost never change for any given client. Don't count on it. If you need to get to that client, give that client a service IP, and then you can always get there.
You're using a 24 mask on that. I mean, do you have to?
No.
Because you had talked about using a Class B earlier.
Yes, yeah. This is a demonstration I set up that is 2 machines that will get thrown away at the end of tonight, hopefully. Yeah, you could use anything you wanted. You could have used a 26-bit mask. I mean, I could have used a 26 or 27-bit mask and still have plenty of room. I have a 2-machine network. A 24 is plenty big. If I was worried, my service IP subnet on my network is a Class C, but I've left room that I could grow it all the way to Class B if I wanted.
Okay.
That goes back to the leave room, like basic line numbers, right? Yeah, plenty of room. Okay, so the server will also have a service IP of 10.200.0.1. And you notice that's 0, not 10. I just had to pick some numbers because this is a one-off. Disclaimer. In the interest of brevity, I have left out a lot of server hardening that should be done. I will do things like SSH around his root. You shouldn't do that. I only am doing this because these machines don't connect to anything I care about and will be destroyed in a couple of days. Hopefully not, because I'm paying for them. Okay, so here's our setup. The virtual machines. In order to make a point about geolocation, I set the server up in London, and I set the client up in New York City. It's funnier when you're from Connecticut, I suppose. The server, you'll notice both of these machines only have 512 mega RAM and a 20 gig disk. That's the smallest machine DigitalOcean will give you. They're $5 a month. DigitalOcean, when they sell you a machine, they rate how much bandwidth you're allowed. On the $5 a month plan, you're allowed a terabyte of transfer per month per virtual machine.
That's a lot.
A, it's a lot, and B, they have said there is no way to track it. They have not started tracking it yet, and they don't plan to track it unless they run out of capacity. And then they may enforce it. And they haven't even said how they may enforce it. They may enforce it by QoS. They may actually limit it. They may charge you. I don't know what their plans are. I don't know if they have any plans. Yeah, I don't know what their plans are. So this is why I love DigitalOcean for this purpose. It is so cheap that if you're going to spend $5 a month, why not spend 10? You know, I don't know. You probably don't need more than 2 VPNs, but VPN hubs. But you know, you can scale it up as much as you want for $5 a piece. It's nothing. I have 4 machines out there.
There's no real local storage being used for this. It's all
no,
it's
yeah,
all bandwidth.
Yeah. So the 20 gig disk, the OS installs in about 3, and then you got plenty of room to do whatever. Run a web server. You know, I run a web server on my VPN host because I've got room and I've got bandwidth and I've got CPU. Why not?
You put quite a lot of web service on in 20 gigs.
Exactly.
Or 15.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll see these IPs later. Don't worry too much about them. You can notice they're pretty obviously different, though. So install the needed software. This is really this simple. These are Ubuntu boxes. Lee and I were looking at the SUSE box stuff earlier. It's not quite this simple, but if you're running it, you know how to use the package manager. Just use the package manager. It really is just run these 2 commands. Dave, you don't have to worry too much. I'm going to publish these slides at the end of tonight. So On the server, you install OpenVPN and EasyRSA. On the client, you just install OpenVPN. I mean, it really is this simple. If you're doing your own certificate servers, here's where we go. You configure EasyRSA. The first thing you do is use OpenSSL to create a Diffie-Hellman file, which it uses to re-randomize the connections every hour by default. And you run this command here. Literally, when you go to easy user share EasyRSA on these machines, you just make a keys directory, edit this file, the vars file. It'll have some defaults for San Francisco in it. You can obviously you can see what I put in there. That's all one chunk. It's very obvious what you should edit. And then run source the vars file. Before you do any EasyRSA work, you need to source the vars file so all that stuff gets set. When it runs, it spits up this note, which I have highlighted in red. It means it. If you run the clean all script, it will, well, clean everything. So the first time you're doing the install, run clean all, because you never know if the packaging people left something out there that you don't like. Then run the build CA script. You confirm, it will pop up a long list of defaults asking you for all the stuff that I listed on that previous screen. Just keep hitting enter if it's right. If not, break out and edit that vars file again, resource it, and then run clean all again. Lather, rinse, and repeat until you're happy. And then create the VPN server certificates. You run build key server. The dash server here is important because you can, one of the options we didn't look at, but you can configure, is that OpenVPN will only allow you to connect to servers which have a SSL cert, which has the server flag set. So you can avoid connecting to other clients. Personally, I'm not that paranoid about them, but it's an option that's out there. We'll see the difference here in a minute when we go to the client configuration. So when you run the build key server, and my server name is server in this demo, so that's why I have the word server after it, it'll go through that same list of defaults again and ask you what your name is and what county you're in and all that. I've snipped that out. Then you get to the bottom and it says the certificate is to be certified until 3,650 days from now. That's 10 years. If you're more worried about having a cert that lasts 10 years, go back and edit that vars file. There's a certificate lifetime variable in there. Set it to a year, 2 years, whatever you're comfortable with. Me, I'm not really worried. If somebody's hacking my VPN, I've got bigger problems to worry about, like who's going to be knocking on my door. The catch here is you can very quickly, as you're hitting enter, get past here. And if you hit enter on either of the next two questions, it will leave the CA database in a really weird state, and you have to do some ugly cleanup. So be careful when you get here, and you have to enter yes to sign the certificate, and then yes to commit this to the database. That will then create this server.cert and server.key file in the keys directory. The CA cert would have been there from when we ran build CA. Copy those three files over to Etsy OpenVPN.
If you didn't say yes, it's going to put that in a funny place?
No, it created the cert, but then it didn't create it. It created it in the CA database, but then it never actually created the files. It never creates the files for you. So then you have a cert with a name that's in the database, a common name that's in the database, but you don't have the actual file for the cert anymore.
So that Y is not really a default Y. It's
correct. You have to enter Y there. Yes.
Funny.
Yes. So configure the Open
It's
VPN.
not funny, that's sad.
Yeah, there at that for those two questions there is no default, and it's not. It's also if you hit enter there, it's not the same behavior you get exactly as hitting N there either. Because if you hit N on either one of those, it doesn't write it into the database. So then you could rerun it as many times as you wanted until everything looked right, and then you could create the files. Okay, so configuring the OpenVPN server. I realize this is a bit of an eye chart. I'll read it, but it's basically everything here is stuff we talked about in the previous slides, where I listed the common configuration options.
Port number.
Yes.
Will this run through an SSL proxy server?
I've never tried.
Like if you're only outbound access is 80 and 443, any chance will it run through it if they got a proxy server on 443?
I have never tried.
Probably not, because you're not stuffing any URLs through there.
It depends. Yeah, it depends if it's an SSL proxy or if it's actually trying to hijack the HTTP inside it, I suppose.
Well, a lot of proxy servers now will do decoding and inspection.
They're doing a man in the middle. Yeah. If it's doing a man in the middle, no. If it's not doing a man in the middle, and it's just passing an SSL connection, it's just passing it through, probably work. So port 1194 is the OpenVPN default. If you've got people connecting from Comcast, you've got two choices. Create another server conf file. I've got one called 9201_server.conf. And the only difference between the two is the server line here, because every instance needs its own subnet, and the port number. Those are the only two differences. If you have people connecting, if you have Apple devices, create another one, call it 9202. That sounds familiar. And instead of having a dev tap, have a dev ton, because the Apple people need tunnels. So then when you configure your Apple device, instead of 9201 or 1194, you put in 9202, and everybody's happy. The Diffie-Hellman file we created earlier, you have to call out the CA cert, the server cert, and the server key. The server subnet, you'll notice this has 10.0. That was the one I drew at the top of the demo page, and we will get here. This is wrong. I forgot to change that, the /24 here, but it should be, the netmask has to be spelled out here.
It has to.
Yes, it does not understand CIDR. So this actually should say push route 10.200.0.0 space 255.255.255.0. The IF config pool persist. I give it a place where it can store config files. We can, maybe if we have time, we'll go look at that file later. I enable client to client just because I always do. In this case, it's kind of meaningless since it's just a one-to-one VPN connection, but by default, I put it in my servers. Keep alive 10.200. You may remember I said this syntax is not what you expect it to be. This is the number of seconds between keep alive packets, which I think everybody expects that to be. But this is not the number of packets that need to fail before it marks the system dead. This is the amount of time that needs to pass before it marks the system dead. I can't think of anybody else that does it in this syntax rather than the time between them and how many failures you have. By default, if you're running as a client and the keep alive expires, it will attempt to connect forever. This is good if you have an intermittent network or such things. The Windows client as a client attempts to connect for a long time, but it is not infinite. I don't know how long it is though. It's more than an hour or two. The Linux one, near as I can tell, is essentially infinite. It's gone day. I've had sites where the network was down for days, and it would still, as soon as the network came back up, a minute later it was that site is back on the network. So our lovely service IPs again. So here you have the service IP for the server 10.200.0.1. You want to give it a stroke 32 there, and that does work. And you put it on the loopback device because that way the routing daemon can advertise it even if a physical adapter is down. And as you can then see, IP address 10.200.0.1 stroke 32 is global on LO. A quick note about IPv6. I believe it will work just fine through OpenVPN. It's just an Ethernet device or a tunnel, but I have never tried it. We should play with that someday.
It works on the SSH. I can't imagine why it wouldn't.
Exactly. I just can't guarantee it does because I've never tried it. Then you start the OpenVPN server. This is Ubuntu 14.04, so it's a service OpenVPN start on a sysctl command. But you wait a few seconds, and then you run IPAdder. Besides the other stuff, you should see a tap or a ton, depending on what you configured it as, or you should see one for every config file you created.
I noticed that you just put tap in the config file, but now it's tap 0 when it was created. It automatically increments.
It iterates, yes. It's an iterative number. But if you're using more than one connection, you want to specify a number in the config file.
Okay.
So later, when you set up your routing, you know which tunnel ends up at which place. Because if they're bouncing around the tunnels, the numbers could actually change on you. And if you have, say, I have one route that's preferred over the other one, I want to make sure I set that cost the appropriate way. Yeah, so as you can see, the tap does, to your point, Dave, the tap does have an INET6 address.
But it's a link address. You can't get off the link.
It's private address.
Yes.
SE80s are private.
Yeah, it's a link. It's a link level address. Yeah. I don't have IPv. I must have IPv6 enabled, but I haven't configured it. So that could be why.
Well,
and I haven't given the interface, the config file, an IP subnet to use either.
I haven't.
So that's probably why it just has a link
But
address
that's
on
part of Ubuntu just automatically gives a
link
local
Right.
address. That's actually just a
hash of that.
of your Ethernet address.
Yeah, it's just a hash of that address. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got that FFFE in the middle of it, but the rest of it's the same as your E7, A3, E7 at the end. That's the same as your Ethernet.
Oh, I've gone the wrong way. Yes. Yeah, this here is the same as this, is what you're showing. Yeah. These two octets at the end. Right. So at that point, if you don't get a tap or a ton device, go look in varlog messages, fix whatever it is wrong, and then lather, rinse, and repeat until you get tap devices. If somebody runs into problems, I'd be happy to help them figure it out, but they're generally pretty self-explanatory if you look in varlog messages. And
if you're not going to have a whole bunch of people, I can only have a few of them.
Right.
You just set up a separate tap for each one of them.
No, you only need to set up a separate tap or ton on the server side.
On the server side.
For as many different ports or tap or ton combinations as you need.
Okay.
All the clients that connect, the traffic will appear on that tap.
Okay.
On the server side. I'd be happy to get in more detail with you later when we're actually logged into machines and stuff. Client CA, or you build the client certificates. You run build key here. Wrong screen. Build key here, not build key server. That's the difference. Build key creates the same type of cert, except it doesn't have the server flag set. Again, it runs through the whole long list of where are you, what's your OU, and all that. spits up the same stuff, 10 years, sign the certificate, yes, commit it, yes, and away you go. Now, again, to the disclaimer's point, I'm doing something here I don't want to see somebody else do. I'm copying these certs over as root. So I went over to the client machine into Etsy OpenVPN, and I just suck these 3 files into this directory. The CA cert, the client cert, and the client key. The client config file is about the same size, but I guess a little smaller. You put client at the top. That's how it knows it's a client. That's all it takes. And yes, you can have different instances that are clients and servers on the same machine. Yeah, and I'll show an example of that when we get back down to that slide at the end. The remote, and again, I love their naming. Remote is actually the name of the server you want to connect to on the other end. You'd think they'd call it server. No, they use server to mean subnet. So that's taken. So remote. You can list multiple remotes, and it will go through them top down and then loop back around if it gets to the bottom. By default, there is also a flag called remote-random that you can set in the config file, and then it will pick any of those listed in here at random if you're trying to do load balancing, for example. By default, it does failover. If you want load balancing it, you can use remote-random.
That 178.62, that's a DigitalOcean.
Yes, that's the address of the server in London. Yeah, and there you just put a space and list the port number. So that's how it's really easy and self-explanatory. We're going to use UDP. I want a tap device. You can't mix and match on a given port. You have to, if that port's configured for a tap device on the server, you have to use a tap device here. If you can't create another port on the server, they're free.
Now, when you showed this, you used the 10, they're 11.90 up through 11.99.
9201 to 9210, yeah.
When you did that, that particular set of ports doesn't have anything else on it that you're aware of?
Correct. It is unassigned. It's above 1024. I think 9201 is actually listed as an alternate open VPN port in some places. I found it when I was troubleshooting the slow Comcast connection. I found somebody said, "Hey, yeah, this is the port I used," and I tried it and it worked, and I just stuck with it. Honestly, yeah, the ports are essentially random. All you want to do is avoid, the ISPs thinking they know better than you. Probably don't want to use port 25 or something like that, Here again, the CA cert, the client key, that all looks familiar, and then keep alive 10-120. So it'll try every 10 seconds for 2 minutes. Okay, this gets a little small, but it's basically the same thing. You just run service OpenVPN start again. IP address will show you a tap or multiple taps.
WAP, whatever that is.
Wireless access point. Yeah. Okay. If you're using 9201, pick a different number. It's just something I happen to use, and that's why I said it works well for me. So if you get a tap again, or a ton, or a couple of them, then you're good to go. If you don't, go fix your OpenVPN file or troubleshoot and figure out what's wrong. Just keep restarting OpenVPN until you get one. Now it'll take, the first time it connects, it takes 4 or 5 seconds. It's not quite as quick as the server side. Give it a few seconds to see if it gets the connection. You'll see here it gets 10-200, 10-2. And to Dave's point, the INET 6 address is a link local, so it has the same ending 2 octets as the local Ethernet. Now, of course, that's a virtual Ethernet, so I don't know how it created that number in the first place, but
He did that when it set up that particular
device, yeah. So as long as that works, then you run IP route, And besides your typical local device and your default gateway, you have a link level, scope link, a link level connection for the network you're actually on. That's your source 10.210.2. And then, as you'll recall, I set a push route, even though it's a typo on the screen. I set a push route in the server file, so then it pushed me the route for my service subnet 10.200.0.0/24. If you're using dynamic routing, do not push the route. Let the dynamic routing protocol figure out that route for you. But since this is a one-to-one connection, I pushed it. It's also useful if you want to push access to clients for, say, you only want certain people to get advertised certain other site routes and stuff. There's just so many configuration options. So test the connectivity. If you get this far, you're probably good. But ping 10.200.10.1 in this case, that's the VPN, the internal tap interface IP on the OpenVPN server. You'll see that works. From London to New York, or from New York City to London and back was 68 milliseconds. That's not too bad.
I'm probably over multi-gigabit fiber. So.
Yeah, probably.
Is it really, I mean, is there anything physically in London, or is this?
Yeah, there's DigitalOcean has a data center in London,
okay, so
and I'm renting a virtual server on
you're
there.
renting it in their London center.
Yeah, you could put in one you want.
Yeah, there's New York, Budapest,
Yeah, they got like
Frankfurt,
800 or something like that.
Bangalore.
Okay.
Yeah, when you create I can pull it up later, but when you create a droplet, it gives you the option to pick a
In
handful.
London and New York, you have some diversity there.
Yeah, and this was the reason I picked these is that geolocation demonstration. I kind of saved myself a bunch of swizzling just by rolling a couple of
Sometimes you
demos all
can
into
get
one.
things from Spotify over there that you can't get here.
Yeah, just like BBC. You can get all the BBC programming if it looks like you're in London.
Unless it requires a license fee. I mean, there's some stuff you try to do from BBC that even if you are located in London, you have to show that you paid your license fee for some features.
I can believe that. I've never actually tried, but I can believe it.
Like 10,000 bucks.
So there you go, and then that's both your IPs. Now, if I had no problem this first time I've had no problem, but if you get to this ping here, the 10.200.0.1, and it doesn't work, this is where you need to go look at reverse path filtering on the machines. Reverse path filtering drops a packet on the floor if it appears on an interface that does not have a servicing IP already assigned. Now, why it worked this time, I don't know. It did. We have, anytime you're doing any kind of high availability, anything like that, any virtual IP work, you pretty much have to disable it. So if you're starting to do funny network things, you think everything's set up right, but it just doesn't work, go check that. It's a system Etsy SYSCTL option or whatever that file like. Yeah, it's in there. It's pretty obvious, and if you just Google RP filter and the OS you're on, it'll be there. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so salt to taste. At this point, you're done. Ish. IP tables will probably come in handy at this point. Most of the use cases you can come up with will require some network translation and routing funniness. You're ready to implement your use case. You can extend to multiple hubs at this point. It's easy to extend to the multiple hubs, servers, whatever we want to call them today. Just copy that Etsy OpenVPN directory, go into the server conf file, and edit the server line, because obviously you can't have an IP conflict. You got to pick a different subnet. That's generally the only thing you'll have to change. because if you have 2 or 3 on one VPN server, you're going to want the same 2 or 3 on the other VPN server for redundancy. So you just copy all the VPNs or all the config files over, change the server subnets, and this is where dynamic routing comes in real handy, because then it just kind of builds your route tables everywhere for you. At that point, if you do extend multiple hubs, at that point, add the routing, add your dynamic routing, your choice. You know, I use QUAG and OSPF, but your choice, and some network address translation. As I said earlier, network address translation is required for the service IPs to be published on the way out. Yeah. We'll as I go through the next step here, which is the geolocation demo, after we've built the subnet, after we've built this, there's some IP tables commands in here that will be relevant. So the clients in New York, as you can see here, NYC3, their third data center in New York. The IP is 159 something. So typically, to Lee's point, you probably want to hijack your default route at that point, or use cases. There is a route, there is an option that you can set in the config file that will hijack your default route. It will figure out who your server is. It will create a specific route in the route table for you, and then hijack your default route. I do not demo that here. So in the interest of making things work, I pinged this check IP DNS, DYNDNS.org. I got an IP address. They have a couple, but it doesn't really matter. I went and I ran wget against that IP address. Aside from some HTML headers, what it comes back with is current IP address is this. You'll notice this is the client. But let's say today we want to watch some BBC. So we want to appear to come from London. So we go over to the server. This is actually all one-time stuff you need to do on the server. You echo 1 to proxysnet IPv4 IP forwarding. You want the server has to allow forwarding, IP forwarding, and then you use IP tables and mark with the mark of 1. Really doesn't matter. It's just a number. You just need a mark. And at the pre-routing stage, so that's as soon as the packet comes into the kernel. Inbound interfaces tap plus. The plus there is actually the wild card. So if you have multiple devices, or if you have taps and tons, you'll just need 2 of those. You just put one that says tap plus and one that says ton plus. And you can actually tag them with the same, or mark them with the same mark. Doesn't matter. So what happens then is it goes through the TCP stack. If it's coming out, if the same packet's coming out the other end, so you add a rule to the post routing table. It says if it's going out the Ethernet interface. Well, that Ethernet interface is your virtual private server's route to the internet. So if the routing determinant should go out there and it's marked with the same mark that you said earlier, then source NAT it to the source, which is the IP address of the server. So on the way out, it appears to come from a valid internet address. Otherwise, when it sent it out, it would still have the 10 dot address on it. Probably get dropped on the floor pretty quickly somewhere, somebody's alien prevention systems. At that point, you go over to the client, you add a route. I'm adding a route to that specific IP through the VPN server. Notice here that this is actually 10.1 and not 0.1. It needs to be 10.1 here because that's the other endpoint of your local tap device. It needs to be whatever that is. And this is where, if I had dynamic routing, what I would do is I would go to that server, the server, or the multiple servers, and advertise a route to this IP from them, and then let the routing daemon decide which way to send it.
What was the 91 again?
What's that?
What was the 91 again?
That's the IP address that I picked for the check IP website.
Okay.
So then when you run IP route, you can see I have a route to that IP via the internet or via the VPN server with a device of tap 0. Everybody's happy. And when you run wget against that same IP address, it returns a current IP address of this, which happens to be the server in London. We are in London, and you can watch the Beeb to your heart's content. So, this is the other use case. This is a slide we kept saying we'd come back to. So I'm going to sit here while we talk about this for a minute. One of the things I mentioned earlier was that a VPN can be both, a machine can be both a client and a server in separate instances, of course, but it can be done. So in my case, this is fairly representative, although I do have some other sites here and users outside. This is fairly representative of my setup, actually. VPN-B, the VPN-B client, in this case DigitalOcean, is actually a client to the VPN-A server. The reason for this is that if I lose this link here, for example, and site A then has to come to VPN-B, it has its choice. So I could lose a link over here and over here. And the traffic would take a slightly more circuitous, slightly more latent route, but the traffic could easily come from site A through VPN-B over to VPN-A and down to site B. That's the beauty of open shortest path first.
Which is the subject of the 201 presentation.
Exactly. and yeah, has lots more options. So basically, this is what I do. My buddy in Connecticut, completely blind. So one of the great use cases I have is I've set up VNC on his Windows desktop. I can be pretty much that I can get an internet connection. And I've been in lots of places over the years.
What version of Windows are you using?
He's using 7.
Okay. Because VNC and 10 are not, they don't like each other.
This is 10. This host is 10. I use VNC. Gotta use real VNC. I use real VNC. I use the free version, but there's many nowadays. There's many flavors of VNC. We could probably have we could have another whole talk about remote access.
Do they have a single click version?
A single click version for the server side or the client side?
Client side. Well,
yeah, you can download. Which remote? Okay. So what I do from anywhere is I know what this IP is on his machine. And once I get on the VPN, I have a route that will take me, and I can use the internal IP of his machine to get there. I can do whatever I need to do. So, saved us a lot of trouble considering he's 1,200 miles away. Yeah, basically at this point, it's a network you can get from anywhere to anywhere. Now, if you were paranoid, you could do things like, okay, well, if there's no legitimate reason to get from site A to site B, or from site A to site C, or whatever the combinations are. Again, for certain values of infinite, there are infinite choices here. All depends how paranoid you are, how much everybody trusts each other, and yeah, how much they're willing to fight to make it work or not. So I'll leave this up because this is probably where we're going to spend most of our discussion time before we get into demos. Any other questions?
I just want to make a comment for a lot of other folks in the room. Basically, you have a VPN, but it is used for accessing private/personal machines on whatever links you have up. This is not used as, none of these sites are using the VPN as like a gateway to the outside world.
They all can.
But they're not.
But I do not, I occasionally do for my laptop. Okay. But as a rule, I do not, correct.
Okay. The only reason I mention it is.
But then how do you listen to BBC?
I don't. But if I was so inclined, and I had it, and one of my servers was in London, which it isn't, but if one of my machines was in London, then yes, I could do exactly that.
This is just for demonstration purposes to have a contrast between the two.
Right, exactly.
Gary, the point I was making is his use case is basically personal/private.
Right.
The other use case that most of us think of for a VPN is if you want your endpoint to be in London. So
it's that
you can go to-
geolocation, exactly.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, which is the next step, which is like a 201 group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
201.
we can bring that up in the routing because that does have a lot to do with the routing.
Okay.
And
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in that scenario, it'd be a lot simpler because all you do is change your default route to that endpoint, and you're done.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah, your routing cable becomes much
And you
simpler.
wouldn't have to worry about NAT and SNAT because your default route is out that endpoint.
You would still have to SNAT at that machine though, because your default
Yeah, on the VPN
on the
server.
VPN server. Yes, yeah. Yep. Any other questions before we get into the children and animals portion of the evening? Live demos.
Just go ahead and demo your stuff. I don't want to get into Bud. I want to save that for another class. Or possibly a
Well,
group session.
okay
Unless
then.
you want to.
I think well we can, but what you're doing with Bud there is essentially what I showed the essential
Okay,
screenshots
so you
of.
want to go ahead and do that?
So we can, but I mean it's the same stuff that's there. If anybody wants to see, I can just kind of piddle around on my network,
Yeah,
and we can.
That'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you. We're going to go on to questions here in a minute as we go. That's interesting. So the first thing I need to do is make sure my VPN actually restarted. Also, a counterpoint to Lee's point about pulling up the to hijacking the default gateway. If I was not on my VPN right now because I don't want to be by default, and I was hijacking my default gateway, when I did that, all my connections die. This way, I can still get into my private network, but because I'm only affecting the routes that are applied to subnets in that network, I can start or stop it at whim.
Yeah, well, there are ways around that. You can set up a static route to your private network and the default route out to VPN, which is what I do in a shop.
That assumes the VPN's up.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. If you don't want to leave the VPN up. Okay. So let me just make sure I got where I needed to. Okay. So I am going to bring up a putty session. On
You got somebody else commenting on putty?
Tunnel AZ.
I mean, granted, it's usable, but there's so much stuff that just still doesn't work right.
Okay, so change settings.
You better make the font about twice.
That's what I'm working on. There we go. Does that actually work? I don't think so.
No, I don't use Putty.
Oh, no, it doesn't. Okay, so here I am on a machine which identifies itself as Hammy. That's a little long story, but this is the Azure instance VPS that I have. So here, hopefully I don't show anything too embarrassing, but we'll see how it goes. So if I run IPA on this machine, can everybody see that okay, or do I need to try to make that a little
Bigger
bigger?
would be better.
Yeah, another 50% would be better.
I would say another 100%. Just double it.
Yeah, but then I only get 20 characters wide.
Yeah.
That's fine.
That's easy.
Okay, so if I run IPA, you'll see I have a tap, a ton, and another tap. Tap is, or I happen to know tap 0 being on the 112 is the Comcast port 9201. Tap, the tunnel is on port 9202. I set that up because one of the guys on the network uses Apple devices, so I had to set that up for him. And then tap 1 is 10.11.2.1. You'll notice these are all I don't know. These are stroke 23s. They're double class Cs. So those are my tap devices.
And what was the significance of because you use it on Apples?
I have a tunnel device set up. I have a tunnel endpoint set up as well.
Which is significant for Apple because it's a tunnel.
Because the OpenVPN client built into Apple only supports tunneling. Yeah. All the other stuff I have complete control over. Almost everybody else that connects is on Linux anyway, so I set it up as a tunnel or a tap rather.
Well, I'll
So-
have to investigate if there's an add-on OpenVPN for the Mac.
There probably is, but the built-in one works just fine as a tunnel, so why screw with it?
We can do better.
So as you see here, my IP route table is rather large. All the 10.10.0 addresses are my service IPs. 10.10.02 is my house. 10.10.04 is actually the DigitalOcean server. 10.10.05 is a guy that lives up in Illinois. 6 is something. 10 is my Nagios server.
I got a question. Yeah, I got a question. How do you keep track of all these service IPs?
Remember when I said plan before you start?
Did you have a host table?
Hold on, let me see if I can find it here. Yes, I've gone this far down the. No,
Bump it.
actually, what it is a basic Wikipedia page that sits on, as you can see, it's hard to read the IP, but it's 10.10.01. So it sits on this server I'm SSH'd into, actually. And it doesn't have a lot in it, but one of the things it has, besides site info, so we all know how to talk to each other in case I die tomorrow, is the network info. And here is where I keep track of all my service IPs and all my endpoints and all my network assignments. This is basically, I mean, it's not huge, but it's sizable.
If you change one here, it doesn't change anything.
No, this is just a documentation site. But that's how I keep track of it, right there. An interesting thing here, the Spider server. While we're here, that's actually a really good point. That's not correct anymore. The IP lives on the DigitalOcean server now. Well, I actually have a printout of this tacked to the wall in my office with some notes on it that I haven't gotten to yet. But the interesting thing about the Spider server.
Did you ever think about using the DNS mask and setting up your own DNS server?
I do run DNS inside here. I do split horizon DNS. Yes.
Okay.
That would be like 202 perhaps.
That's the only way I can keep track of them on the internal zone.
Yeah. I do. I like that because it's a pretty straightforward list, and I can just pop that up when I need to assign another IP. I go, oh, okay, I'm down to 6. Yeah, okay, you can be number 7. So yeah, as you can see, this looks a bit messy, but this is the server. It's not nearly as bad on the clients. The perhaps more interesting part down here, because I'm using dynamic routing and Quagga, you can see Proto-Zebra. Quagga is actually the Latin word for zebra. God knows why somebody decided to be stupid and name the package Quagga, even though the config file is named zebra.conf.
Probably some guy in Rome.
When in Rome. So these subnets down here, as you can see, some of them are 24s, some of them are 27s. The those are other houses' subnets. 11 is my buddy in Springfield. 30 is the guy in Illinois, the other guy up in Brighton, Illinois. 99 is my buddy in Connecticut. 128 is my house. And honestly, I don't remember what 92 is. Although that's the other subnet at my house. Okay, you can tell because you can see that these two are via the same route, so they're going to the same VPN endpoint to get out to the real world or to get out to their place. So from here, for example, I can ping 192.168.99.4. That is my buddy's PC in Connecticut. So if I wanted to VNC into it, I just, from here, from my laptop, I can just VNC there to a private IP address. The beauty of this, by setting up the clients to call the servers, is that there are no holes in any house's external firewall. It is entirely within the realm of possibility, if you're doing enough traffic or you have a latency problem, that you would want to, I could connect my house directly to his house. All I would have to do is poke a hole for port 1194 or some other port at one end or the other and then configure them. It's the same deal where I showed VPN B is both a client to VPN A and a server for all the other sites. Same idea. And you absolutely want dynamic routing if you're going to do something like that.
So the holes are in the cloud machine, not in the home machines.
Exactly. Matter of fact, here, I'm going to do something on my other screen so I make sure I don't do something bad before this works. Okay. So, I'm going to do it over here now that I know it's safe. So I'm bringing up the VNC viewer right here. And you can see this has an address of 192.168.123.150.
Pop that up, we can see it.
No, I can't. But it's really irrelevant. It's just this happens to be my virtual machine host at my house. This is the operating system running on the physical hardware at my house, not that hosts a bunch of other VMs. So I know it's safe. I don't have to worry about what my buddy in Connecticut's doing while we're sitting here. So you'll notice, now mind you, I'm using UMSOL's wireless, so that's probably helpful over using a cell phone connection or something. But when I hit connect, it pops up and asks for the VNC password. When I hit enter, now it pops up over here. Of course, here it is already that quick. I come up here. The neat thing about VNC is I can come in here and I get, well, that's not great. The round trip time is 110 milliseconds, it says. If we played with this a little more, you can see it's not great, but it's.
And that's Windows 10?
This is 7.
Okay.
Not great, but it's tolerable.
It's certainly tolerable, yeah. And if you're hardwired in, like if I'm sitting at the office doing this, it's pretty darn quick. My let's see here, my round trip time from here, and yes, I know. Does that even work? No. Okay. 10:02. My round trip time from here to my house is between 109 and 130 milliseconds. Really, when you think about it, the traffic's going through the Azure server at a minimum. It might, I don't know. I don't know what the route is. I don't know what route I'm even taking right
We'll
now.
do a trace route.
Because they're taps.
Oh,
And it thinks,
it won't
and the client thinks they're all on the same internet, on the same Ethernet segment. Traceroute doesn't work. If you really care about traceroute working, use taps. Then it will work just fine. But the point is, I don't.
That one was on a tap.
or use tons that'll work fine.
Hey,
Okay, yeah. The point is, at this point, I don't really care. It just works. I don't really care. Now, that's what Nagios is for. Nagios should be alerting me if my VPN links between the servers or from a site to the server go down. Yeah. So that's that. If I let me SSH over to that server real quick. See how ugly this is.
What program should be alerting you?
Nagios. It's a network monitoring application. Okay. So apparently I haven't gone from here to my
Running your Poncho machine?
yes. Should I change that password? I don't know why this is taking so long. I hate it when that happens. Okay, so I'm on the Davis machine. Davis because I live on Davis Street. This is my VPN endpoint in Hannibal. So I've gone from here through the VPN in Azure, or I logged into the VPN in Azure, and then from there I've SSH'd over to my house in Hannibal, and you can see I've got DNS set up because it says I'm from Azure.darkweather.net, which is the domain name we use for our VPNs. So from here, for example, I can ping 192.168.99. Yeah, I can. So my round trip time, if I was sitting at home, my round trip time through the VPN network and to my buddy's house in Connecticut, to the Linux machine sitting in his bedroom, and back to my house through the VPN is in the 80s to 90 millisecond range.
By the way, we are on a clock tonight.
Oh, I don't know. Are we?
I mean,
Okay, it's
no,
9 o'clock.
no, because they close at 10.
Oh.
Restaurant closes at 10.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'm just finding things to talk about at this point, so we could probably call it at any point.
Well, we got two options. We either go have pizza or we can keep yakking. Gary, you want to take a vote?
I guess we could do that. Let's see. Well, first off, let's go straight to a vote with the caveat that I'll throw in a thing at the end if there's anybody who's got any questions that really need to or ask before we head off to eat it, if need be. So, how many want to keep yakking here? Go ahead. How many want to break and go to the restaurant and start chowing down a little dinner? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
As I said, I will entertain if there are any questions we really need to answer before we shut down here. Anybody got any quick questions they want to throw out?
I really would like that.
I will be going over there, so if there's anything you want to just talk one-on-one about, then I'm happy to answer. Or yes, I will publish it tonight, probably, if I remember to make the changes before I go to bed.
Alrighty.
If not, it will be tomorrow at the latest.
But you can publish the recording.
I want to make sure it sounds decent anyway. But yes, I will also be publishing that.
Will you
Or
be
making it available.
processing the recording before you publish it?
Depends how it sounds.
Oh, okay. I want to see what you can do with that.
We're going to see how it goes because we weren't passing a microphone around. So
you're
you're going to hear dead air while people are asking questions. But
What about passing the microphone?
we weren't passing a microphone
Oh, we
around.
worked then, yeah.
I
So,
was gonna say, you kind of like the command line.
okay.
And
But I'm going to end that recording now.
every time I go back and forth between them, I just use SS.
So I'll stop.
Okay, now it's Chuck Doolittle.
And I don't know.
Get
if
us
it's
on the
on
recording.
show
Chuck
next
Doolittle
when
from
you're
Great Bar.
not.
Thank you very much.
So I like the line.
For those of you who may not remember,